But as we get rolling here on this Tuesday edition, normally this segment will be on Mondays, but Labor Day holiday meant we had to push it to Tuesday. This is Don Clardy. He was a member of the 88 Furman National Championship team, and we're going to have some fun over the course of this season. First of all, Don's going to be here to provide a little bit of analysis of the Furman games that were just completed the previous weekend. But then we're also going to go week by week through the 1988 schedule and have Don give us his thoughts on that game. He was a sophomore that season, so we'll be talking about the South Carolina State game from 1988 this week. And then when we're all said and done, he's going to tell us a little bit about what he does at New York Life. So you got a lot on your agenda right here, right?
A lot on my agenda for sure.
How you doing, man?
To it. Yeah, I'm doing good, Dan. It's always nice to chat with you. I appreciate you having me join you.
Well, I think this is going to be fun. You obviously know a little bit about what we're talking about here, and it's going to be great since here at Furman we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the 88 National Championship team with the hashtag Diamonds Are Forever, the Diamond Anniversary. It's going to be going on the entire athletic calendar, 18 and 19. I thought it would be good to kind of have some fun with this thing. So we'll get to that in a moment. But let's start with what we saw over at Death Valley on Saturday from your perspective. Knowing what the challenge was going in, nobody has to fool anybody with any extra hyperbole. We knew what the challenge was going to be. What did you see out of Clay Hendrixs' team that you can take away from a positive standpoint?
I actually saw a number of positive things. The score got away from us. That wasn't a huge surprise. But, offensively, I think we saw a lot of young talent step in that's going to be able to help us this year, whether it be Granger at quarterback. I was surprised personally that he got that much playing time. I thought he did a good job handling that kind of environment. First game as a true freshman. Running back Watkins, another freshman, number 31, very impressive, I thought. Had some good runs, almost broke one or two runs, almost took it the distance. Another true freshman, I think, is Bell, the wide receiver, number 88. Looks like he's really explosive. Going to add another strong wide receiver to, already what I think is probably going to be a strong group.
And you're not partial to receivers at all, are you?
Yeah, I may talk about those the whole time if you let me. But and then on defense, the thing I noticed is, they really looked the part. One of the things in recent and kind of past history, particularly in the defensive backfield, we've always kind of been kind of small. When you look out there at some of the guys out there, the corners, you've got Lemons at, I think, 6'3", Weems at 6'1", Oki, I think, is 6'4". When I just looked out at the field, that's not to mention who I think are probably going to be our two best players. Anur, probably going to be our best defensive back, and then Trapp, in the time I saw him playing, made a few impressive plays as well. Those are not big statured guys, but when you add some size, I think it allows us to be a lot more versatile on defense with what we can do with our defensive backs. And I thought defensively they held up pretty well.
Yeah, with 5 minutes to go in the first half, it's a 13-0 game. And it appears that Clemson's going to have to punt the ball back to us from deep in their own territory, which would have given the Paladins good field position, but a video review overturned an incomplete pass and gave Clemson a first down. And lo and behold, they end up scoring twice in that 5 minutes to make it 27-0 at the half. So that score was not really indicative, I thought, of the way that the defense played for the vast majority of the first half. And then you kind of got wore down, as you might expect in that game as the second half went on. But you tell me what you think, but the defense is going to be the unit that's ahead of this offense early in this season, just because of the sheer number of veterans who are back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the defense needs to take another step, though. This week it's going to be a huge game against Elon. 2 games against them last year. Fortunately, in the playoff, we came out on the top of that one, and we lost the first one, but that's going to be another tough challenge for them. But yeah, it will be interesting to see. It's hard to get a real measure of exactly where they are when you're playing a team that has the talent that Clemson does and the just dominant athletes that they do. So I'm excited to really see them play Elon and just see really where they're at. I'm excited about what I think they're going to look like.
Yeah, and it's going to be an interesting change in atmosphere as well, because we're going to go from a crowd of 80,048, which was the announced attendance, to a crowd that probably won't break 3,000
Right.
at Elon. I don't think they got to the 3,000 mark, and maybe just above 3,000 for the playoff game last year. So the atmosphere is going to be different, but the motivation, I think, should also be different, because while that was a great opportunity and the kids love playing in those play-up games and playing in those atmospheres, this is the one that matters. Now you're back on the ones that start counting towards whether or not you're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Furman is the hunted in this game, right? Because they took that away from Elon last year in the playoffs. So Elon's got a favor to return, or they're going to be really fired up, I'm sure, about this game. So Furman has to have the intensity going on the road again. They're not playing in front of 80,000 people. They have to find a way, I think, to carry that intensity into that game, because I think Elon's going to come out with intentions to take care of business.
Being a former wide receiver, obviously you started off by talking about what you noticed in Furman's secondary going against Clemson's wide receivers. What was your impression of what you saw out of Amir Trapp, the Clemson transfer, who started at corner, started at punt returner? Chad Staggs told me last week that he brings a little swagger to that defense. Did you see any of that swagger on the field?
I absolutely did. Obviously, he's not a physically imposing guy. He's a small guy. But just watching him early in the game, and these are guys that he played with, so he probably has a chip on his shoulder going in there, but he did not back down. In fact, the series you were talking about, he also made a play where he stepped in front of a quick slant. Mm-hmm. They ended up colliding with each other and the ball bounced away. He almost picked that off, and that would have been 6 points. Just, not – even though you're playing against some really talented receivers, he was not backing off and giving them room. I mean, he was stepping up to the challenge, I thought, and that's the kind of leadership we're going to need on that defense.
Well, can you imagine the reaction of that crowd if Amir Trapp, who transferred from Clemson to Furman, had picked that and taken it the distance?
That would have been interesting, and they would have probably been silent for a few seconds. And it was one of those where I was just like, oh, because it was so close.
Yep, it was. This is Don Clardy, the former wide receiver at Furman, who is going to be with us all season long on Mondays starting next week to kind of break down what we saw in the previous week's Furman game, and also go step by step, week by week through the 88 season, which we'll get to in just a moment. In total, what do you take away from what you saw on Saturday? Where do you think this team is after week one?
Offensively, I think they have a lot of talent. Their offensive line also impressed me at times. So I think you're going to see a team that is better all around than they were last year offensively, because they've had a year to gel under this new offense. But we've got to stabilize the quarterback position. That was the wild card coming in. That made this game that much tougher. Whoever the quarterback was going to be hadn't really played. So are they going to be able to stabilize the quarterback position? Who's it going to be? I think there's still a question. Granger, I think, ended up playing more than anybody, but you had 3 quarterbacks play at least. So I think that's going to be a huge issue, is can we stabilize the quarterback position, get good play out of the quarterback. And then defensively, I think Coach Staggs has done a great job ever since he's been here. They do not sit back. They get after it. They put pressure on the ball, and sometimes they give up some big plays because of that. But I would just rather see that kind of aggressive defense to make plays, and I think they'll do that. And I think they have the guys back in position to do it.
Yeah, back to the quarterback thing for a moment. Harris Roberts started and played the first series and then did not play again the rest of the game. Jamar Lincoln was next in line, and then Granger. And Clay seemed to indicate in his postgame comments with Tom Van Hoy and Marcus Morris that the rest of the year was going to be the kids battling it out to see. So we'll watch that and see what happens. But so that's week 1 in the books, looking ahead to Elon now. And, of course, we're going to be previewing that quite a bit as we go on through the rest of the week. All right, let's flash back. And before we even start, this is phenomenal. It's nice to see somebody else collects and keeps things way, way longer than they probably should, much to the chagrin of his wife, I'm sure. But you were telling me that you're going to be maybe even more well-informed than you would have been about these games week by week. Why?
Because amazingly, when we played back in the '88 season and beyond, there was a coaches show. They don't do these anymore, I don't think. At least Furman, I don't think, does. But it was Coach Satterfield at the time was our head coach, and they did a 30-minute show every Sunday morning, and basically highlighted the game and had the coaches' comments. And somehow, just because I wanted to see the highlights of the games, I recorded each of those coaches' shows, and somehow they've made it through many years, many moves, made it from an ultimate transition from VHS to DVD, and I still have those Satterfield shows that haven't been watched in a long time, but I was able to watch that South Carolina State first game of 1988 season yesterday.
You know what? Now, since you've mentioned that, the wheels are starting to turn. I wonder if maybe there's a way we could flash some of those highlights up on the screen here.
Let's just say the quality of the screen is you can see it, but it's not what you're seeing today.
Look at this look at this screenshot that I found in looking for the schedule, which I couldn't find. But this is a screenshot off of television as soon as that game ended. I mean that's the quality we're talking about there.
Yeah.
Furman Paladins 1988 NCAA 1AA at the time national champions, and there's Coach Satterfield being surrounded by players and media and well-wishers. Looks like he's walking toward midfield for the handshake. So, listen, people have seen this show for months now. Quality is not an issue.
Well, I'm happy to bring it in because it would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, if I could get a couple of them ahead of time and burn them onto the laptop, we might be able to play with them and see what we can do. That'd be pretty cool now to be able to show some highlights. Absolutely. As well, especially if some of those highlights involve a guy named Clardy, right?
Well, I would put those at front and center, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I could cut those out and put them. It only would take up about 2 minutes for the whole season, but I could put those out front for you.
You do what you have to do. Going into the 1988 season, and ultimately this team would finish 13-2 with a loss to Clemson and a regular season loss to Marshall, which you would avenge in the playoffs.
Right.
But going into the season, Don, was there a feeling that this group was going to be something special and that you had the talent to be a national championship contender? What was the overall feeling as you broke camp and prepared for that first game against NC State?
You know, I think we had a good feeling because we had really good leadership. You know, that started with Jeff Blankenship, Kenneth Goldsmith, which were two of our captains, really strong leadership. I don't know that there was necessarily a national championship feeling. I think in '86 they had made the playoffs, maybe had lost in the first round. '87 was my freshman year. I think we were 7-4, didn't make the playoffs, and I think we were picked to finish middle of the pack. So I'd say our focus was more on conference goals at that time. There's always going to be some talk about, hey, let's make the run all the way to the national championship. But I think it was about getting back at the top of the conference initially. And again, we had some great leaders on that team going into that season.
And interestingly enough, correct me if I'm wrong, you talk about all the veterans, all the great leaders you have, but it ended up being a freshman quarterback that led you for most of the season, right?
Well, actually a sophomore
Frankie
DeBusk, who I went to high school and played with. But yeah, he Although, interestingly, he did not start out the season starting. Patrick Baines started the season. I think Frankie had some shoulder issues during two-a-days that kind of put him a little behind. So it took him a couple of games to get into the rotation. So Patrick Baines played most of the South Carolina State and also started the next week at Clemson.
All right, so let's talk about South Carolina State. What do you remember about that opening weekend in 1988?
For me, particularly, it was my first varsity college football game. We had junior varsity back then, junior varsity games, so I didn't travel with the varsity my freshman year. So for me personally, it was really exciting, my first college football game against SC State. So that's the biggest memory. And just, understanding that, okay, this is a bigger thing now, more responsibility, just being part of that team. The goals I'd strive for, that was the day I was going to get to step out on the field and be in the wide receiver rotation and play college football, which has been my goal since I was a young kid.
So what are you thinking at that juncture? Throw it to me quick and let me get the jitters out of the way, or don't throw it to me right now until I have a chance to settle down. What are you thinking?
You know what I was thinking, because back then if we threw the ball 15 or 20 times, that was a lot of throws. We ran a lot of option. So I was thinking every time I got on the field, make a play. We had a lot of blocking responsibilities, and honestly, I probably got to play more because I went after it in blocking. So whether I was blocking or whether they were running the play the opposite side of me, I was going to go block somebody, hit somebody, and if I was fortunate enough to get a pass thrown to me, I was just going to try to make a play.
All right, so kind of walk us through how that game played out.
Well, we actually jumped on them early. You talked about the world's shortest punt return.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had one of those. We ended up blocking 3 punts in that game, which you never hear of that happening. And one of those blocked punts, literally the guy went in, I think it was Julius Dixon, and took the ball off the punter's foot. Now, he went down to the ground. We didn't return any of those for touchdowns, but at least 2 of those 3 blocked punts were in the first half. So we really dominated defensively. They couldn't do a whole lot. Offensively, we just ran it. Bobby Doherty, Kenneth Goldsmith did a lot of damage in that game. As I look back on it, amazingly, I didn't remember this, but key parts of our national championship run on offense, John Bagwell, Dwight Sterling, did not play in that game. So it was really Bobby Doherty and Kenneth Goldsmith carried the load there. And then Patrick played most of that game, Patrick Baines, and Frankie came in the fourth quarter and actually threw me a pass in the fourth quarter. So I was glad to see my old high school teammate. We were able to hook up on our first college pass together in that game. So that was really exciting for me.
So the final score?
38-0.
So a little whitewash to start the season.
It was dominant. I don't think they really came close to scoring in that game. So I'd say after that game, the attitude was probably started to change a little bit on, whoa, we're pretty good here. And then we'll talk next week about Clemson the next week.
What was the bus pass your first reception, or was there?
It was.
So
we had hooked up in a couple of junior varsity games, so I had caught a few junior varsity passes, but in a varsity game, and it was a post corner route, and he threw it over the shoulder, and I just laid out and caught it. It was probably one of the best catches I had, my first one in college.
Is it on that highlight reel?
It is.
Nice.
It is. And I got to show my kids last night. I'm not one who takes out all the highlights and shows them, but while I was looking at it last night, I had to call the kids down and say, hey, this was your dad's first college catch. And, they were impressed for about 5 seconds.
I was going to ask if they believed you. Come on, Dad, that's not you.
Once they made out my number on the grainy video, they believed it. They believed it.
That's fantastic. So 38-0, the final against South Carolina State. And what do you remember about postgame in the locker room?
Well, now that's a tougher one. I know we were just excited. I was personally excited just to participate with that group of guys, and just, it when you dominate a team like that, there's just a feeling that you get that you can kind of take on the world. So I think that really set the tone for our season, and I know everybody was just thrilled with that result in the first game.
Well, I'm looking forward to doing this all season long, especially now since you have all the video highlights and coaches shows to refresh your memory. This is going to be great as we move forward. Next week, we'll talk about week 2 of that season, their game against Clemson. A little symmetry in the schedules 30 years later. Both teams played at Clemson during the season. So we'll talk about that one next week. Also, we're going to give you an opportunity to kind of tell people a little bit about what you do now that your playing career is over and you're in the real world.
Yeah, and I've done a number of things actually over the years, several things. I started out as an attorney, practiced law for about 9 years, did estate planning and business planning, and then actually transitioned into a financial advisor type position, and I'm affiliated with Northwestern Mutual. And really what I help folks do is clarify their financial goals and then kind of hold them accountable to achieving those goals. It really has a lot of similarities to being a coach, I guess. You're really educating folks. You're helping them hit those goals that they're striving for. I guess the one difference is, if my client is kind of like the player and I'm like the coach, the player has the ability to fire me, so that's a little different. So I have to kind of, handle that a little differently maybe than that coach-player relationship. But that's been a great experience for me to help, whether it be business owners, executives, professionals, kind of achieve financial security is what I'm trying to help them do.
So when somebody comes to see you at Northwestern Mutual, what are some of the things they're looking for?
A lot of times they don't have it all pulled together and they're just trying to figure out how do I, a lot of times it may focus on retirement. I want to make sure I have a good retirement, but there's so much more once you dig into it than that. As we all know, we've had friends and family members that unexpected things happen, whether it be an early death or a disability or a long-term care need. So they may come in thinking about, hey, I just want to make sure I'm saving enough money for retirement and making enough money to get there. There's really a lot more to it than that. Touching on my prior career as an estate planning attorney, I'm not drafting legal documents or wills for folks, but that's part of my job to make sure they have all their estate planning in order and other risk management issues as well.
You almost fall into a category that my buddy Dave Glenn from ACCsports.com falls into because you were an attorney and you have done some media work with the Furman Network.
Right.
Dave is an attorney and is a talk show host and is the head guy at ACCsports.com. His mother told him that if he were a politician, he'd be the 3 most hated people in America. Lawyer, media, politician. So
I've heard my share of lawyer jokes over the years.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have. Well, listen, this has been fun.
It has.
And if people want to find out more about what you can do with the financial advice at Northwestern Mutual, how can they get in touch with you? And in the future, we'll actually have a graphic up so people can see it on screen.
Yeah, don.clardy at at northwesternmutual.com or our direct office line 864-679-3849. My associate Joanne, who's a lot of fun and great to work with, would be talking to you as well.
All right, you're going to email me that information later so I can turn it into a graphic and we'll go from there. Enjoyed it, man.
I did too.
Thank
a lot
you
of
much.
Fun.
This is going to be fun. We'll do this every week. So next week he'll have some thoughts on the Elon game, and we'll be looking back to week 2 of 1988 when that team went to Clemson.
That's right.
All right, we'll take a break and come back and continue with more on this edition of the Dan Scott Show right after this. Hey, everybody.